Today, Tom and Karen take up Succession Season 4, Episode 7. Hello, everyone. Tom Fox back with Karen Woody to unpack our current favorite TV show of all time, Succession. Karen, welcome back.
Thanks, Tom. I'm happy to be back.
Karen, today it is Episode 7, Tailgate, and certainly belying what fun you might have at a tailgate. I found this to be perhaps the most gut-wrenching episode since Kendall killed or
Mm.
engaged in action that led to the death of a boy in Scotland or someone in Scotland.
Mm.
But this was just for me absolutely gut wrenching on almost a genetic level.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack, and there's everyone again acting at their worst again, but with such clear intent to just cut them to the core.
Yeah. The person that I thought almost made a bit of a comeback in this episode was Connor, and we can get into that in a little bit. But should we just start with Shiv and Tom?
Okay. Yeah. We'll start at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning, though, because that for me set it up. And something happened in that scene that I directly pulled as a life experience. Shiv's in bed doing some reading or something, and Tom takes her some breakfast in bed with some polling numbers because it's the day before the election and with what he calls a little prezi. And it made me think I really irritate sort of baby talk among adults, but they seem to engage in it all the time. But anyway, what you and I might call a present, he called a prezi. So Shiv opens the prezi up, and it is a scorpion smashed and put into, I guess, a paperweight. And Tom, I'm not sure if he thought it was a joke or he really sees his wife as a scorpion. I think that can be one interpretation. I thought a lot about that. But whether you agree with that or not, she did not like it. And it was clear immediately she didn't like it. What were your thoughts on that first scene?
Yeah, I couldn't figure out if he really thought it was a joke or that joke that she would think was funny. It fell so flat, and then it was just one of the many moments in this episode that was so cringe inducing because you watch him waffle and think, this is funny, right? This is funny. And she's trying to still be kind, but
Not really.
not really. Yeah. And so yeah, I wasn't totally sure if he meant it to be as cutting as I think she received it as in that way. And I think he says something like, it's funny, I love you, but you kill me and I kill you. That's the joke here. But given obviously the very recent history and the betrayals between both of them, I don't know how he thought at all that was not going to be a very significant, sort of not funny gesture.
I did that one time. I gave somebody a gift that I thought was humorous, and it was not received in that vein. And it was in a response to something I had done, which rated an apology, and it wasn't taken in that vein either. I really related to that scene. But then we moved to the preparations for the tailgate party, which is in Tom and Shiv's apartment. And
Mhm.
Tom thanks Shiv for letting him host or co host the event. This is clearly important to him. But I got intrigued by his whole dialogue with the staff around the wine to push. And I thought that was just one more piece of evidence of his complete insecurity. And that if you want to be a social climber, what we used to call a gold digger, and that's your goal, that's what you do. And be insecure about it. You say, here's my goal. I want money. I want power. I want to be near that. I want to be something. And you go out at that 110%, whether you call that the Duchess of Windsor or Meghan Markle, and just accept it. But he is trying to convince the woman who's going to serve drinks to push a German wine, but don't call it German and don't show them the label. I don't want them to know it's cheap, but push it. So that I thought that was just a really interesting aside.
It was a pull forward from something last episode where they got this one. That definitely there was some reference to how this it was to something earlier about how I think they've somehow had acquired all this one that isn't that good, and he knows it's not that good, but he's trying to get rid of it. I guess that was exactly your point, which is he's trying to pass it off as being decent and hoping that people will fall for it. But even he knows it's not great.
What did you think about the brothers, co-CEO brothers, strategy to kill the deal through the regulatory side of things?
I thought that was an interesting play. I guess they're trying to lean on either an antitrust or some other, like you said, regulatory block of this. And so that's why they're very much leaning into Shiv's connections on the political front and even maybe some of the ATN connections to people in Washington or wherever that could potentially block this. It was a good play. It's not maybe a surefire strategy, as you can see from even recent headlines of how well the DOJ can handle some of those cases, whether they work or not. But I think it's risky. I think it's risky because it's not a sure thing, as I said, but then it's also risky that they're out there saying that they're being even more overt or letting more people into their scheme in the way of trying to block this deal. But maybe that's self-evident at this point. Certainly after this episode, it seems that way between Kendall and Matson having words with each other that suggest that it's not all hunky dory in this merger at all, or this sale, whichever it is, acquisition. Yeah, I thought it was an interesting play and seems like the next one in the playbook, but one that you're getting further away from what I think will be the successful ways to block it. I might be wrong about that.
I was intrigued by the introduction or reintroduction of Nate and just his name, Tom's, the hair on the back of his neck seemed to bristle. And for those who don't recall, Nate's a former lover, co-worker, and friend of Shiv. And she was clearly close to him when she was in her political life. And that relationship changed a little bit. And Tom clearly does not want Nate around. And I tried to think about that through my lens. And frankly, I would take the position she walked down the aisle with me. You may have been with her, but guess what? She's not with you now.
Yeah.
Maybe that's too parochial, but he is really bothered by Nate. And I thought that was one more sign of his insecurity. And we can get to the whole Nate thing in a little bit. But what about Kendall and Roman? Do you see them going, even getting more, I don't want to say insane, but off the rails?
Yeah, individually, I think their performances in this episode suggest Roman in particular seemed to be kind of off the rails. And you could see why, like Jerry puts him in his place. But the way he treats Connor's inexcusable. Kendall seems in the beginning like he's maybe got it together. He gives what seems like a composed sort of pitch to open the tailgate party. Even when Matson walks in right at the moment of silence for Logan, which was so almost over the top, and how he still handles it. But I feel like Kendall is he's very still true to character in that he's not totally flipped, but it's like some threads are coming loose. But Roman seems to just be still just a wild card, like making these sort of outlandish either statements or treatment of others that Roman seems to me like he's pretty far off. But yeah, I mean, I guess they both pull it together and they talk to Ebba outside and they try to get some dirt on her. There are some still sort of ways that they might be working in conjunction and can try to attempt to think strategically. All of those seem to keep falling on their face. I think they both seem like they're definitely under a lot of pressure. It seems that's showing.
So one scene I skipped was where Tom was going to terminate, effective immediately, the entire ATN Foreign News Corps. And at the last minute, he says, "Why don't you handle this, Greg?"
Right.
And he gives Greg a script and he does it over Zoom. Frankly, I was not surprised to see that. I've read about that happening over the past couple of years. It seems exactly in line with what ATN would do. But I guess what surprised me about that scene is now we flip to Matson and his little entourage when Greg sits down with him, and they don't think anything of Greg, but they seem to respect him because he terminated those people. Did you find that believable in any way?
No, I think everyone's always mocking Greg somewhat, but that's definitely what Greg is trying to flex on, which is I can play tough. Not only that, listen to what I did. I actually think I took that scene as like them having a moment of realizing that they're firing a lot of people. I feel like that was a little bit of intel as to the state of
Mm.
affairs at ATN. And they're looking at him like, is that right? So that piqued their interest, not so much about Greg, but about you guys are doing mass layoffs. Like it was interesting to hear. So that's how I took that. Maybe they know that from other sources or something, but I felt like it was Greg flexing, but then bumbling into things he maybe shouldn't be telling Matson or making public. I wasn't sure. That's the first thought I had when I saw that.
So in this around the same scene, Matson completely belittles Ebba. And I thought that was the second either worst scene or most cringy scene behind Tom and Shiv, but even ahead of Roman and Connor. I thought he completely belittled her in front of her coworkers at the party. I now believe she really is just doesn't she has social anxiety. And you can almost see her cringe being at this party. And then he goes after her for that. Now, this is his head of HR, a clear corporate confidant, a lover on and off, a blood receiver. And I just thought that was one of the worst ways I've ever seen a boss treat someone.
Yeah.
And she goes outside, and that's when Kendall and Roman come out there, and they basically try to apologize and ask how she is. And she said, "Whatever you think he did to me, it's not nearly as bad as some other stuff." And then she proceeds to tell them. But what I liked about that scene was when Kendall said, "Can I have a cigarette?" And I went, "It's over." She's on Team Wake or Royce Royko now. And I thought it might lead to down the road somewhere, but that was a brilliant move by Kendall. And I didn't know he had that kind of nuance in him. I thought he doesn't have his father's ability to play the scene as it plays out. He has one way to do it and he does it.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that too. I thought it was a little obvious where he realizes that she's climbed up. She was going to stonewall them on the question, that it was going nowhere, and that maybe she was going to tell them to leave. And so he tries to find the reason to stick around and have this sort of quasi, however intimate it is to have a cigarette or light a cigarette for someone else, that kind of thing. Is he was definitely still playing into this. We're the same. I'll have a cigarette with you. Let's not go back to our corners too quickly. So yeah, it was savvy in that way, I think. Yeah.
And that led to the reveal that Gojo's numbers in India are not just a little off, not just a little inflated. They work if you have two Indias.
Yeah.
And I think there's 3 billion people in India. So that's a lot of numbers. And that's a pretty material
Yeah.
thing. Now, I would have assumed Waystar or Royco had done some sort of due diligence, and maybe they didn't. Maybe they didn't pick it up. Maybe it was hidden. But that seemed to be a fairly big piece of information that was given to Kendall and Roy. How did you think it played out from there?
Well, didn't we learn it from Eva and that scene? But then didn't we learn it either before or sometime around then of Matson telling Shiv the same thing? Like that, I feel like that we learned that from two places. I'm not
Well,
with them in the room, but I can't recall if that's how that worked.
see, actually, I think Roman went to Shiv because Shiv had tried to ask Matson for a job earlier and he brushed her off. But now she's realizing that her position may be very precarious if the deal doesn't go through, and she sold her brothers out, although I don't know why she thinks that. They stab each other in the back all the time. But so I thought it was after she had made the pitch to Matson and the second time they were together. And I just have to give the shout out to whoever thought of the gold make jacket. Brilliant. Loved it. I don't think I could pull it off, but I loved it. But what did you think of his response? Is that just what corrupt CEOs say? Yeah, we got just an algorithm problem.
It's a major algorithm problem. I actually thought that was that's such a huge, maybe because I'm just seeing this through our attorney lens, our due diligence, people who have to run down all the reps and warranties or from our old lives when we were doing those things, when there's a significant M&A deal or whatever the reason. I thought that was huge. And I think it gives enough leverage, I would think, to Roman and Kendall to walk away. That's a material misrepresentation. So I thought that was huge. So the idea that he's sloughing it off seemed crazy to me. I was like, that's the whole ball game. And it's what prompts, I think, Kendall in the end to decide that maybe we take, as he says, the reverse Viking and go, we gobble up Gojo and we do this, we go on the offense here because it's a big deal. I don't even know if he'd want to do that without doing really peeling back what really is going on in that company. But yeah, that was huge. I did not think that was worthy of just like shrugging off.
Let's go back to Nate because I was really intrigued Kendall makes a pitch to Nate, which basically says, you get the regulatory wheels clogged up and we'll scratch your guy's back for 100 days. And Nate said something I was completely not expecting. He comes back later and says, look, I am not comfortable in the way this conversation's going. I'm going to leave. And I can't remember what Kendall says, but Nate says, I'm not Gil and you're not your father. And I absolutely love that. And I wonder if Kendall has that self awareness that it's literally not Gil and Logan. And one, it can't be, but it's not. And Kendall will never, not to say he's not a brilliant person or can't be at that level, but he will never be his father. And I just thought that was a really insightful point. I've seen some debate as to whether that was meant as a cut, whether it meant as a compliment, but I certainly took it as absolutely correct, and that things were different now. 2 days after your dad died, Kendall, you need to wake up and be aware of this new reality.
Yeah, it's yet another time someone has pointed out to one of the children that they are not their father. We saw that last episode with Jerry saying that to Roman. And Nate says it here, but Nate says it in a totally different tone. And I think the line he says after that of you're not Logan and that he's not his predecessor, he says, and that's a good thing. Like he's trying to
Yes.
say, we can do better. We don't have to be this shady, the horse trading and all this sort of backroom. He's saying, I'm going to have a little more integrity. And that is the way we should go. Like you should not be your father. And you know what, Kendall, you're better than this too, is how I understood that. So I thought that was an interesting spin on what is, I think, the theme for a lot of these, which is none of you are Logan Roy and none of you can be. And maybe, as Nate's saying here, is maybe that's great. That's probably for the best that we're not doing the old, going through the motions in the way the old guard would have, because it was pretty corrupt.
Let's go over to Connor, because the polling is showing that the conservative candidate who Royko is backing may be falling behind, and they want Connor to drop out because they believe, however small, he will draw votes away from him or the conservative candidate to his libertarian platform. And so they asked Roman to get him to drop out. And Connor, sensing an opportunity, says, okay, game on, let's negotiate. And in a show like this, if you had straight comedy, it wouldn't work. But I thought those scenes with Connor were the most comedic, and they were played straight.
I know.
And Mogadishu, he rejects out of hand. It's too many car bombs.
Yeah.
But then we move to Oman, and he's explaining to his wife, "Don't worry, there's a bunker and everything." And she wants to know, well, will we be living above ground?
Yeah.
Then they move to, he wants to go to a place, he has to go to a country where they have nuclear weapons. And that's officially a fairly limited number. You have to assume he's not going to go to India, Pakistan, places that have acknowledged it, South Africa, Israel, maybe. But United Kingdom has them, China has them, we have them, Russia has them. And they propose he start in what used to be a state of Yugoslavia. And I think they started with Slovenia. And he immediately picks up on this because he sees this as the road to Berlin. And that was actually how Winston Churchill saw World War II going. They were going to invade through Greece and up through Yugoslavia, and that was how they're going to hit the soft underbelly of Germany. So I don't know if it's a reference to that or not, but that whole series of scenes with Connor, I thought was just hilarious.
Oh, yeah. He says Slovenia, Slovakia, something, and then he just goes, no, it's a no on the slows. Anything slow. I mean, it was actually, I thought so, it was so funny, but then also a little gross because you're like, I really hope this isn't actually how these things work. But you know that in some aspect it does. You just really do hope they have a little more background or expertise on the country. But a lot of times it is just some horse trading, some favor, some donor to a particular campaign that makes you like, oh, this makes me cringe for our diplomatic corps in some ways.
So the meltdown Roman has, I thought that was cringeworthy moment number 3. And no one had gone after Connor quite like that in any of these seasons. They've
Mm.
said lots of things about him, and certainly Logan did, but he even goes after his wife. And I thought Connor actually, what led to that whole blow up was Connor saying, "No, I'm going to vote for democracy and I'm going to let it play out. And I'm going to let the people decide." And he didn't say it, but if I get my 1%, I get my 1%. If I get 5% in Alaska, I get 5% in Alaska. And he goes after Roman goes after Connor. Then he goes after the wife. And Connor just calmly stands up and says, "I've made my mind up. Do not insult the woman I love. And we're going to leave."
Mhm.
And that may be the strongest I have seen Connor.
Yeah, I agree. And even Willa in some way, who starts to stand up to Roman and in some way, acknowledging that this is not okay, the way that he's treating Connor. Yeah, it was a breath of fresh air given how much Connor is just a punching bag for so many of these scenes and certainly for these relationships. So it was nice to have him have a little bit of a backbone and be like, this is out of control. This is, you can't treat me like that. So I like that scene. I agree with you.
I really like the scene with Jerry. I don't know what inch size heels she was wearing, but she appeared to me to be 6 or 7 feet tall and almost towering over Connor. So let's set this up for our listeners. They're both getting a drink, or she's getting a drink, and he wanders up next to her and he tries to apologize, but not really. And she will have none of it. She said the lawyers are involved, but there's a couple of other things that I thought were best said personally. And she proceeds to tell him that all those pictures he sent will be released to the public if she doesn't get what she wants. And I love it. She wants money that's going to make her cry. That's how much she wants. And I just thought that was great. And she played that, I thought, perfectly.
Yeah. She really did. I also liked how she ended it because it was even more damning than I think what she was saying in the threat, which was her line saying, I could have gotten you there. I could have made you what you wanted, essentially. And that I think is partly why Roman then I think it's in the next scene and goes and hauls off on Connor and it flies off and is as mean as he is to Connor because he's just I think he's flooded by the Jerry comment. And then I think everyone in this episode is starting to be, be curious if they've either picked the wrong horse or made some poor choices. Shiv, certainly, even Roman in some ways, because Jerry maybe will come out with what she wants in some ways. Matson and Kendall maybe obviously on the deal. So yeah, it's a lot of revealing things that make people have second thoughts.
So the meltdown, or rather the line you said where I could have gotten you where you wanted. I thought it was just brilliant because to me it showed the entire scope of the dynamic between those two. Whatever Jerry thought of Roman, she saw something in him. She was not simply willing to support him, but she wanted to support him. I don't think it was as a son. I don't think it went to that. Maybe as a protege, but she clearly saw something there and something that she was willing to be a part of. And he mistook that for some other emotional feeling. And whether it's because of his psychological makeup, he just needs 65-year-old woman telling him what to do or what. But I thought that line, and as you said, it was absolutely brilliant. He completely missed the boat on that.
Yeah.
We talked about the Tom and Shiv meltdown. Kendall pulls Frank in, not as CEO to board chair. No, this is Kenny and Frankie. And that's when the reverse Viking comment comes.
Right.
On the one hand, can't you have a dialogue? Certainly, it can't be illegal to explore options, even if at this point it's not clear what is in the best interest of the shareholders or if the proposed option is not in the best interest. Surely you can at least pose that question and reject it, can't you?
Yeah, I don't think they're it's a question, I guess, at some point of the materiality of the probability versus magnitude kind of discussion. Listen, we're not going anywhere yet. We're thinking about this, maybe even talking to the counterparty. Like even at that point, at what point do you need to disclose any of that? It gets that gets into sort of the classic materiality question. But no, I think it's fine for him to strategize with Frank on that, to maybe feel out maybe if they should, yeah, not go forward with the way it is structured as it is now. And he says, let's gobble him up instead of the other way around.
And I
Um,
thought it was certainly a fair point to say this is a cash and stock deal. And if their stock is worth one third or one half or three quarters of what they say it is, that's a material fact that we need to put out to our people. So I thought that was within the realm of something that could and should be said.
I think that's great. That's right.
Typically, we try to talk about some of our favorite lines. And I have to say, I couldn't really focus on any single line like I was from other shows. There were lines, there
Hmm.
was certainly dialogue. The whole Tom Shiv was just gut wrenching and the things that they said to each other. But there was Matson sent a text, I think, about why he wasn't coming before Shiv called and told him, you need to be here. That was pretty profane laced as well. So I guess maybe what were some of your final thoughts? And I'm beginning to wonder if the funeral's going to be the last episode.
I think it must be at this point. There's so many things to wrap up. And yeah, that makes the most sense that it would be the final episode. But you never know. This show loves to surprise us all the time and have do things completely out of order that we don't expect. I I think some of the lines, like you said, that I we've heard were good. It wasn't as the usual hysterical zingers. A little bit with Connor. Some of that was because we didn't see a lot of Greg, who usually lands a lot of those lines. I did think that some of the like important lines, I think we've already discussed a lot of them, like Jerry saying these things and the comments between Nate and Kendall, all these "you're not Logan" comments. But I did think Kendall's comments at the end about even when Frank is, "What about your siblings?" And he says something like, "I love them, but I'm not in love with them." And he says, "One head, one crown," is I think how he ends either that discussion or brings it. And I
Yep.
thought that's a pretty major shot across the bow, especially because in theory he's still co-CEO or co whatever he is with Roman. He just rejects that and in theory just out of hand by saying one head, one crown. And so I think we'll see maybe where that's the direction maybe Kendall is going to go, and we'll be back to where we started, which is all of the kids fighting among themselves for the power. But I think that'll be interesting to see. I think I've read a lot about Tom is now so gone for broke that maybe he is one of the most ruthless characters in because he's literally nothing left to lose. He's played nice through all of this, and now maybe he doesn't have any. Like I said, nothing left to lose makes someone a fairly dangerous character potentially. I don't know if I totally believe that. I don't know if his characters could pull a lot of that off, but we saw that at the end of last season. Like no one thought Tom was going to be the betrayer, but yeah, so I think it'll be really interesting to see where this goes in the last few episodes and what they do with Matson and what they end up doing with the funeral.
I guess there was one particular set of lines from the Tom Shiv that I wanted to play with, which was Tom says, you shouldn't be a mother. And in my book, that's about the worst and meanest and ugliest thing you can say to a woman.
Mm.
But that's not the first time Shiv has heard that. Her mother said that to her. And I guess I'd really never thought, but maybe some women shouldn't be mothers. And, but for Tom to say that, and I really thought Shiv was going to say, and then we'd have some big reveal that would lead somewhere, and we didn't.
I know.
And I suppose we should have mentioned that the present that started all of this was given after a night of raucous sex. And I still can't believe somebody hasn't noticed there's physical changes to her body that would lead one to ask a question or two.
Right.
But she still hasn't revealed that. And now I'm beginning to question my own sanity. Am I in a Twin Peaks dream that I dream that she is pregnant? Because I just can't believe she's holding on to that. There has to be a reason for it. And these screenwriters are fabulous. I'm sure they have a reason. But what did you think of that line when Tom delivers it? Was it as cutting, as biting as I felt it was?
It was brutal. And you could see how it lands differently because she's pregnant. It's already a terrible thing to say. It is such a perfect use of the audience knowing that fact and how much that everyone's gasped. What if she weren't pregnant? We'd be like, God, that's not a nice thing to say, obviously, which is I think what she says, that's not nice. She says some sort of not as mean line in response. That's not a nice thing to say. We all sort of gasp because we're like, oh man, he's going to really be eating those words in a few months or whatever. But I do also, to your other point, I think this really is, in theory, I don't know how this is totally possible, but I think all these are really effectively like back to back days. Like they keep referencing, like my dad only died a few days ago, but there's a lot that still happened. But I think in theory, she's just still now 20 weeks. Like we're not at 26. I think it's like we're still in this weird time bubble, but nevertheless, yeah, it was so brutal to watch, and they both said the meanest things. They know each other well enough. I think this is the case with every long relationship, is that person well enough to know what will just destroy them, and they both have no holds back. They don't hold back on that. Like Tom being a hick, Tom being social climber is not worth anything. He's not good enough ever for Shiv, and then him throwing back at her that I'm sorry, Logan never approved of you. And then the line from his mother. It was just like hit after hit of like, how low can you go?
Yeah. So I agree on the days. First of all, Logan's still, quote, above ground, unquote. So unless they've got him embalmed like Mousy Tongue, they need to do something pretty quick. I thought it was day to day until they went to Norway, because I don't think you can physically fly and have a full day and then fly back. I thought it was at least a couple of days, but it ain't many days, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 3 episodes left. I'm almost sorry that I'm doing this once a week because I just can't stand to wait
I
for
know.
the next episode. It's so good. I guess until next week in episode 8.
Till next
Karen.
week again, Tom. Thanks again.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Woody Report, where Karen Woody and Tom Fox have talked Succession. I hope you'll join us again next week where we take up episode 8. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever great podcasts are listened to. The Woody Report, the Succession episodes, is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.